So Catherine, take it away.
All right, thanks, Grace. So I'm Catherine. I'm with SGVUX and DIA Design Guild, and I currently work as a product designer in Taiwan. And it's for a company that has users all over the world, and we've run into some privacy, not issues, but some privacy considerations when we're designing and researching. And that's part of the reason why I was interested in helping Grace with this talk today. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. And especially it's because this is a talk on privacy, we want to be upfront and let everyone know that the session will be recorded. And the reason we are doing so is to share the information with people who weren't able to make it today. And so if you're not okay with that, you can keep your mics and your video. Oh, I do hear a bit of an echo. Hello? Great. So this session will be recorded. If you're not comfortable with that, you can keep your mic and your video off. And I don't think it'll actually record your names. And then the second thing is we want this to be an interactive discussion. So there will be some questions that I would like to pose to the audience, and just feel free to ask questions or participate in the discussion. And the last part is be kind and respect each other. With SGV events, with SGVUX events and any online events, we want to make sure that we respect each other's opinions and listen to each other. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with the talk. And actually we'll start out with a question, which I would like to ask you guys. So what does data collection and privacy even mean? And it doesn't have to be a profound definition, just in our daily usage as designers, as users, what does this mean to you?
I guess I could start. Data collection means like what a site is collecting about me, or what information I'm providing to them so that they could use it to get to know me better, or to personalize information that they're giving me. So in a way, like how they're stalking me to give me content that they want to sell me.
Right, and that touches on a really great point, which is they're collecting all this data about us, and usually for the purposes of customizing something or providing something to us. But how much of it is actually hinging on stalking? And so privacy there kind of gets into the space of what are our rights around that? What are the standards for that kind of usage? And I know I just touched on that, but for others in the audience, what are the trade-offs of user privacy for you?
I would say a customized experience for most websites, besides just having a generic default experience that if you didn't have that data collection, it wouldn't have provided it otherwise.
Mm-hmm. So personalized experience, customized content, usually things that are targeted for us specifically based on how we're using it or things that we've liked previously. Anyone have any thoughts on some of the downsides of having companies know all this data about us?
When does it end? Or do they even know what they're collecting sometimes? That's what I've noticed. Sometimes they don't even realize they're collecting this amount of data until someone tells them.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. You know, we have a lot of convenience and personalization when it comes to data being collected about us. And probably some of the most direct examples that we've all experienced are probably websites, Netflix recommending shows, Spotify recommending music. And it's really great, right? Because there are probably a lot of shows and songs I never would have known about if it weren't for their recommendations. We get better targeted information, and a lot of data sharing actually helps us have better services. And you can definitely see this in healthcare. For example, we know so much about COVID data, where outbreaks are happening, how much vaccinations are in different places because of the data sharing of this COVID information. And the other side of the coin is how much of it is really profiling and surveillance. How much data are we giving that's not under consent, is too much for what the companies need it for. And even if you've given data to a company you can trust, you feel like you can trust, sometimes there are still security breaches that can happen. These companies may sell your data to other companies you're not aware of. And the worst part is some of this data can be used for discrimination when it comes to profiling users or profiling people for, let's say, going back to the healthcare example, profiling based on your mental health record. So these are some trade-offs with data and privacy, and definitely something that is more scrutinized now. All right, so in terms of privacy in the space of UX design and research, how does it impact our work specifically? I'm interested in knowing if anyone has experience actually touching with privacy in their work so far.
I think I could answer this. I know for me, in my work, we touch on a lot of third parties working with our product. And so one thing that we realize is that there can be some limitations of what information we technically do not get and how we portray information to users when data is sent over to one product or another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great example where, if you're connecting two systems, what is the information being shared between them, and what exactly can we read from other parties?
I'd like to add on a little bit. I think a big part of it is also thinking about anything that we design. What is, like, if we're asking for information from our users, are we actually going to use that for something that, like, basically not collecting information just for the sake of collecting information, which I think sometimes higher ups in organizations are like, let's just collect all the data and then we'll figure out what to do with it afterwards. I think that's a really big thing, is advocating for the privacy of our users. And then as a researcher, figuring out, like, best practices around protecting the information from our research, and only collecting what and holding on to what we need to hold on to for a set amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with research specifically, we often open up with, the research is used for internal purposes. We're already telling our users how we're using that data, and definitely there can be more awareness on how we're managing that data even after those interviews and surveys as well.
I'm also seeing some responses in the chat too. So David earlier mentioned that it's privacy means transparency of what is being collected and how long it's being stored. Evelyn mentioned that it's improved user experience for less privacy. So I think this was from the earlier question.
Mm-hmm.
Justin mentioned that it's convenient for aspects of my behavior I don't care too much about. And then Evelyn mentioned that it's employees can see this information too, this data too, and it can make our work harder, especially to collect quantitative data. So I think this is referring back to earlier, we're talking about how it impacts our work, right, Evelyn? Cool.
All right, yeah, so I'm gonna move on, but if anyone has anything else they want to add to that question, feel free to throw it in the chat. And really, everyone touched on really great points, both in research design and in business. We have to consider what are we collecting, why are we collecting it, and do we really need to be doing what we're doing? And especially in research, when we're interviewing users, when we're collecting data through forms, it's not just the data we're collecting at the time of that research, but how do we secure that data? How do we make sure we use it in a way that's respectful to those users who are providing that information? And even after we are using it for our projects, do we need to keep that data? How is that stored in our research database? And for design, it's not just also how are we taking these research insights from our users. While we're designing flows for our users, how do we incorporate privacy? Are we offering options to them in the settings where they can control their data and how we're tracking them? Are we considering how some of our most vulnerable users are interacting with our data, with their data, and do they understand how we're using their data? And from a business side, a lot of businesses, as someone else mentioned, a lot of businesses think, why don't we just collect all the data we can and then figure out what to do with it after? But really, this is a more reactive approach, whereas a more proactive approach would take into the consideration for our line of work, what do we need to know and how can we provide that in a way that users can trust us and is also respectful to them. And so, for example, if you're using Google Maps, it makes sense that Google Maps needs your GPS, right? They need to know your location in order to tell you where you are. But do they need your camera? Do they need your microphone? Why do they need access to your photos? I guess I can kind of see some use there because Google does take photos for if you visit a location, but is that something you want to share with them? So there are all these questions about exactly what we're doing with data and if it's needed or not. And in my line of work specifically, so far in my experience, I've actually touched on privacy in all three of these aspects. So we currently do research with users in Europe, and Europe does have a privacy law called GDPR, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Actually, I think it's the next slide. But with GDPR, it provides some level of protection for users in terms of their data. So we do record all of our user interview sessions, but for European users, we do not record their sessions. And so that's because of this GDPR protection, privacy protection law. And I just have to make sure if I'm doing an interview with a European user, I have to be careful, or not be careful, but I have to make sure I take really good notes for that particular session. And with design, I last worked on a project where we're designing accounts. So a lot of third-party integrations, what data are we collecting from Facebook? What data can we collect from Facebook and other social media? And if we can't get that information, how are we displaying it within our own product? And so fun fact, if you sign in with Facebook on our product, you can see your name when you sign in. But if you sign in with Apple, we actually can't get your name. So it shows there is a privacy setting, and either it shows your email, and if we can't even get that information, then it shows a random string of text, because that is the only thing we can show for someone whose name or email we don't know. And so a lot of interesting questions, not just on what data we're getting, but how does that show up on the UI as well, and how we're designing for that. And for business, as I mentioned earlier, you really want to consider exactly the ethics around the data. So not just dealing with privacy issues after they arise, but what is your whole business strategy around privacy? And a lot of businesses are really into data analytics and data collection, but there are tools now that are considered privacy data analytics. So kind of alternatives to Google Analytics that can still help provide data insights without tracking too much on your users. And oftentimes in our line of work as designers, researchers, or even in the business area, a lot of the challenge really is how to balance ethical and respectful design and research with our business needs. Now, I touched on GDPR a little bit ago when I was talking about research, but essentially this is a privacy regulation in Europe, and it essentially lays out a couple of principles on how to regulate and use data respectfully. And these are kind of the 7 basic principles of it, and they recommend that companies use data or take a more proactive approach to data. So don't react to privacy issues when they arise. You should you should make sure that your policies protect users' data even beforehand. You want to be clear and concise and upfront about how you're using that data. And as we've been talking about throughout this talk, it's not just what data you're collecting, it's also, do you really need to be collecting that data? And the really interesting thing about this regulation too is it's not just it doesn't just regulate the point of data collection. It also takes into the whole life cycle. So if a third party were to challenge your company on how you're collecting data, you must also be able to provide documentation and be accountable for your data. And so this law is based in Europe, and unfortunately in the US, we don't have anything similar. The current closest equivalent is actually the California Consumer Privacy Act, which also covers a lot of the similar principles. Now, GDPR is in Europe, and why should we care about it? I don't know, maybe there are some of us in the audience who are in Europe, but I know most of us are in the United States. And so why is GDPR important for us? And that is because even though it is recorded within the EU, but it has extraterrestrial rights for Europeans. So that means even if you're an American company, as long as you're processing European user data, then these laws apply to you as well. And if you're a website, then this definitely applies to you because anyone around the world can access your website. And going back to the research example, if you're conducting research with European users, this law applies to how you're processing the data for surveys, interviews, forms, and also how European users are providing answers to your research. So for me specifically, I can't record any of my interviews with European users. We just, I don't think we even record their screen of when they're interacting with our usability testing. We can only, for some users who are willing to, we can record their audio, but other than that, we just take really good notes when we interview our European users. And for a business perspective, if nothing else convinces you to follow GDPR, you can get fined for not following it. And so a fairly recent example of this is France actually fined Google 57 million euros because they felt that they weren't being upfront enough about how they're personalizing users' ads. So this is definitely a highly regulated law and definitely being implemented around the world as long as European users are using your platform. However, something we should keep in mind is that, if you look up GDPR, you'll find a lot of articles about, oh, these are the checklists that you have to hit if you want to make sure you're hitting GDPR. And, privacy shouldn't be something that we do because it's a regulation, right? It should be something that we consider because we want to be respectful of our users, and there are ethics behind how we're using people's data. And better privacy is beneficial for everyone, not just for the users. If companies are able to regulate and be more aware of how they're using their data, they can provide better services for us while also being respectful, and users in turn will feel more secure as they're using those platforms. So some examples of GDPR and how you've probably experienced them. I'm sure all of you have seen these do you accept our cookie pop-ups? And I don't know if anyone's noticed, but after a certain period of time, I felt like I've been seeing them on every single website. It used to be just once every 10 websites or so, and now every single website asks you for cookies, and that is because of GDPR. Another example that you can see, not all websites actually have this, but this Kohan website, if you scroll to the very bottom, they actually do have a GDPR request option. And if you click into it, you can have different granular options of whether you want to see the data they have on you, if you want them to delete your data. And if you're a European user specifically, there are specific data requests you can make from them. Not all websites have this yet, but definitely a bonus point plus if you are on a website that is aware of this. All right, so kind of getting to the core of the talk today, which we definitely want to cover some of the dark patterns in privacy. SGVUX did do a talk on dark patterns, I think almost 2 years ago, right, Grace?
Yeah, it was 2 years ago, and yeah, it was very heavily on the psychology behind the dark pattern. So it was really interesting, especially since one presenter was dressed up as Spider-Man behind a mask doing this, and then the other one was wearing a witch costume. So it was exactly 2 years ago we did it.
Oh, that's right. That was during Halloween too. So for those who aren't aware of what dark patterns are, they're essentially kind of UI that has been designed in a way to trick or coerce users into doing something that they may not be aware of, or that they may not want to do otherwise. And you can see this actually pretty often on e-commerce websites. So let's say you're checking out and then there's a countdown in the corner. Oh, you have to check out within 2 minutes. What happens after 2 minutes? You can actually refresh the page and re-add those things to your cart. So kind of like a fake timer to get people to think, oh, I need to check out right away. Or coupons that expire after, actually, I don't, questionable whether coupons count as dark patterns, but the countdowns definitely do. Or another pattern is they tell you, oh, 20 people are looking at this item as well. So if you want to buy it, you have to, you know, are 20 people actually looking at the item at the same time? We may never know. But in terms of dark patterns, a really great resource is darkpatterns.org. They document a lot of different dark patterns, the psychology behind it. And my favorite is they have a page called The Wall of Shame, where they take real life examples of dark patterns and call out companies who are using them. But today we want to talk about dark patterns in privacy specifically. So what are some dark patterns and how they're used with privacy and data? And so I want to talk really quickly about 5 of them. The first one is deception. So simply just using dark patterns to create false beliefs. And this can be used in a way where companies may tell you they're using, or suggest to you that they're using your data in some way when that's actually not the case. Asymmetric presentation is kind of a visual use of making something more prominent. So you can think of 2 buttons. As designers, we often have one prominent button and a secondary button. But in this case, maybe they're using the prominent button for, allow us to track you. And then the secondary button could be very, very small or very, very hidden. And it's actually the option that allows you to control your privacy. Or in some cases, that button is not even there. And those are the worst cases. Confirmed shaming is a practice that kind of shames or guilts users into giving information. Oh, give us your email, otherwise, you know, you're a bad person. You know, you'd be surprised, but I have seen copy that directly says that to me. You know, either I sign up for something, or I guess I'm not an informed person. And there are other ways of kind of guilting users into performing a certain action. Now, forced continuity, I'm sure a lot of us have experienced. You know, you want to sign up for something, they have a free trial, sounds great, you can try the product, but they ask you for your credit card information first. Why do they need your credit card if it's a free trial? And when that free trial ends, not only do you get charged automatically, you can't seem to find a way to cancel your subscription. That has actually happened to me with Amazon Prime. I started out with, I think their student subscription, and then they charged me automatically for like the full adult version after that was over. And then the last pattern I want to talk about is hidden costs. So sometimes there's information, or in this case, there are fees that are kind of hidden until users provide some sort of information. So for example, going back to the e-commerce example, maybe you've already added things to your cart, and then they ask for your email and your address, your credit card. And then only until you get to the last step, you find out that they've added a $20 fee, service fee on your total. And so a lot of these are kind of questionable and not the most ethical practices in the industry. Some examples of dark privacy patterns. Does anyone want to take a crack at some of the dark patterns that these 2 pages use?
Are they shaming me for not having a 3rd grade reading level on the right?
Exactly. You'll notice that it looks like you can submit your email to subscribe to some sort of book newsletter. And if you don't want to, for whatever reason, I guess you just don't read. The only copy to not submit it is to click the I don't read at the bottom.
Oh, it's so aggressive.
There are some really fun examples. If we have time after this presentation, I'll show you guys some of them. You'd be surprised at some of the copywriting they use.
You can just really tell also, like, who the copywriter, I mean, I don't know. Some people might feel like they have to write like this because they're boss, or I don't know, but you can also really just tell where the copywriter might be at to assume that like this is an okay way to talk to people. But I also noticed that on the left example, it's confusing because the blue makes it seem sort of like that's a positive thing to have ads be more personalized. But if you don't know that that requires more collection of data, it's kind of confusing, and it makes the black button gets lost, and also it just makes it seem for some reason like it might be a negative thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing about the text inside the buttons too, if you notice, they're both almost exactly the same. Make ads less personalized, make ads more personalized. Unless someone actually takes the time to read it carefully, they almost seem like the same thing. And it's so easy for us to see a wall of text and think, oh, I don't want to take the time to read all of this. I'll just click that nice big blue button.
Totally.
Yeah. And what if you don't want any personalization? Where is the option for none of that, right? All right, so what can we actually do? What if you're the one being told, right, you don't read by your boss? There actually is a framework for designers, researchers, and engineers, actually just anyone in tech. There is a framework called Privacy by Design. And this is a framework that was designed by Dr. Anne Kavalkian. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. She was at the time the privacy commissioner in Canada, in Ontario, Canada. And what's really cool about this is this framework actually was drafted back in the 1990s. So GDPR came out in 2018, and this framework already existed for almost 20 years. I don't think it was actually finalized and given out as an official report until I believe late 1990s or early 2000s, but even then that's already pretty early compared to when GDPR has come out. And it kind of covers the same concepts as GDPR. A lot of it is asking companies to be ethical of how you're dealing with user data. You should be proactive about privacy. So don't react to when issues happen. You should consider this, and it should be a core part of your strategy, your business strategy, and a core functionality of your design. Are you allowing users to change their settings? Are you providing options to have granular control over your data, over their data? Is it the default? So, a lot of times we go into the settings. Nowadays, there are settings to change your privacy, but they're all turned on by default. And, ethically, it should be turned off and have users opt in. Does it offer lifecycle protection of user data? So we mentioned this earlier, where it's not just at the point of data collection. Do you securely protect this user data? Do you keep it for a reasonable amount of time? Even after users no longer use a product, how do you manage their data in your platform? So for example, if I deleted my Twitter account today, is my data still there? People can still see my tweets unless yeah, people can still see my tweets. I think there is an option where you can remove yourself completely, but even then, your core data, is it still in their platform? How can you be sure that there are no more traces of that? Very obviously, you want to be transparent, documented, and verifiable, and that just means you want to be upfront about what you're doing with that data. We've mentioned this so many times, but also, how are you documenting that data? If someone asked you, I want to see my data, can you present that to them? If someone challenges you on how you're keeping that data, can you verify exactly what you're doing with it? And as designers and researchers, often we talk about, oh, we want to be user focused. We design for the user. And even in privacy, we want to be user centric. Are we making it easy for users to understand the data? Oftentimes we see this giant wall of text. No one ever reads the terms and contracts and the privacy policy. But now there are ways that we can design to make it easier for people to understand it. Are you providing bite-sized pieces of how you're using that data? Maybe you can provide the wall of text in an accordion that collapses easily so people can focus on different sections. And I think the really great part about this framework is they also have a philosophy of being positive sum. So that means they don't see it as black or white. It's not just privacy or security. There should be an achievable balance between privacy and security, and also your business needs too. All right, I want to get into some fun examples. So this website is actually an article I looked up as I was doing some research for this talk. And right away, you can see that I was presented with a cookie consent form. And I was curious. So I did click on show details. And so on the UI on the right, you can see that it expands and it actually does provide pretty granular explanations of every single cookie they're using. And that was really great. I could see who was tracking me, why they're tracking me. And you can see actually here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but they have a column for expiry too. So that's crazy. Just for reading this article, there's a cookie that tracks me and they will track me they will have this information for 2 years. And so the great thing is they do provide that granular option, but there's no way to unselect anything that is not necessary. So even though they have a section called necessary, I can't unselect any of their marketing, any of their statistics cookies. And the worst part was I accidentally scrolled up and that automatically accepts all the cookies too. Yeah, and if you do read the fine text, it says by continuing to use the site, you agree to your use of cookies. How many users are actually going to read that? How many users are going to scroll and think, okay, I didn't click the allow cookies button, so I didn't accept them. So some of the things you can be aware of the next time you see some of these cookie forms.
Can I
I
ask
mentioned-
a question? Oh, sorry.
Oh yes, go on.
In that previous example, was there any way to opt out?
There was not. I looked very carefully. I could not find a single way to not accept all of them.
Oh, wow.
There are some that have buttons that say, oh, accept only necessary cookies, or we can actually click check marks to not accept all of them. But this one, you either have to accept all of them or you can't read the article. And that's really terrifying. One of the scary parts of it is before GDPR, before 2018, we were accepting all cookies on every single website we were going to. And it's kind of scary now, only when it's apparent how many cookies there are, how much data tracking is happening. I was actually telling Grace just before the talk started how, I feel like even just 5-6 years ago, you were hearing, oh, big data is like the next thing. Companies have all this data and this field is about how to use that data. And you never really stop to think about, oh, back then, even before it was kind of regulated and starting to be scrutinized, the norm was let's just collect all the data we can and figure out what to do with it afterwards. Yeah. So I talked a little bit about Twitter earlier. I don't actually know when they updated their privacy policy. I wonder if it also had to do with GDPR. But the first time they did do this, it's really great. They had this big splash screen, and you can see, you kind of compared to the Instagram one we saw earlier, it's spaced out a lot more, and it's designed in a way where users are more likely to read the text, and the copy is also definitely a lot more friendly. And then the other thing is at the bottom, the two kind of call to actions they have. The first is sounds good, and the second is review settings. Very clear. They do highlight the sounds good, but I don't feel that it's designed in a way to be deceptive about what you can do. And if you click into your settings, you actually now have a panel called personalization and data. This is a previous version. I believe the current version is actually just called settings and privacy, and it has even more granular options. But when you go into it, there are all these different options you can check to either stop tracking your data, to whether you want to personalize your data, whether you want to personalize just on this one device. That's the crazy thing, if you're on your phone, your computer, they can kind of aggregate that data and create profile on you. But if you want them to only look at your phone data, that is also an option now. And the great thing about what Twitter is doing here is they're providing very detailed descriptions of what each one does. So this is really great. The one downside is I did try to delete my data. You can download all of your Twitter data, but can you actually delete it? That I was not sure. And it actually wasn't even clear if they delete that data if you delete your account. So if you delete your account, I wonder if your tweets actually do still show up, and if they don't show up, what are other ways your information appears on the site? So these are a lot of the ways we can consider as we're designing too. Don't just think about kind of the happy path when you're designing user flows. What if they do delete their account? How do we want to show their information on our platform, on our product? If they decide to limit this, what are other ways we can design when we can't show certain information because they've chosen not to. And then the other downside about what Twitter has done is personalization is not the setting. So all of these were turned on for me when I first went into the setting, and you have to go in and manually uncheck them to opt out. It makes sense from a business perspective, right? What users would actually go into their settings and tell them, I do want you to track me. Canceling Amazon Prime, I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this. We have given our credit card information to Amazon. Oftentimes we give our addresses to them too. You can save your addresses in different cards you want to provide payment. But if you want to cancel, how easy it is to actually do that. So Grace actually tried to do this when we were going through this talk. You have to click on your user settings, then you click on, there's a section where you can go into your Prime. Then within the Prime page, there's a membership page. Within the membership page, there's a drop down called End Your Membership. And then it takes you to this bottom row of screens where you start the process to end your membership. There's even a process here. And I don't know if I can zoom in, but you can see at the bottom of the screen, there are 3 yellow buttons, and they've obviously put the weight on the visual weight on the first one. That's kind of highlighted in blue. Mm-hmm.
You can zoom in. You can come up.
Oh, I can zoom in. Oh, okay,
yeah.
Cool. We are using Miro today, not PowerPoint. Yeah, so if you can see here, there are 3 yellow buttons. The first is remind me later, the second is cancel my benefits, and the third is keep my benefits. They obviously want you to click on remind me later, which actually even tells you this keeps your benefits and reminds you 3 days before your membership renews. So essentially, it's the same thing as keep my benefits. They just send you an email. So if you actually want to cancel, this is very tricky. If you actually want to cancel, you click cancel your benefits. And then it takes you to another page where they tell you, oh, are you sure you want to cancel? Before you go, why don't you try all these other options? There's even a stepper here for canceling. And if you click continue to cancel, again, the middle button here, you get to this page that looks like, okay, you've completed, we're sorry, this is the tricky part. Grace, we're so sorry to see you go. And it sounds like you've already canceled your membership, but you actually have not. You actually still have to click a third button to confirm the cancellation. And the worst part is that button is not even on the page, it's under the fold. So you have to scroll down. Everything above the fold is convincing you to not cancel your membership and other options you can take. And all of these practices, even though for businesses, you get why they're doing that, but for users, it's just how many steps do we need to go through? How many confirmations are we doing? Why are we even doing this? And then for a user, your review of the company also goes down. Amazon Prime kind of stopped me from unsubscribing. That doesn't look very well for them. All right, and I think
one more question about that flow.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
The one in the bottom left corner where it has like the remind me later and cancel my benefits. Those buttons, like for me, when I looked at this, I thought it was talking about like that specific service because there are 3 columns aligned with 3 buttons. So I thought like it would just cancel my benefits for Prime Video, not for everything. So I think that's also like another tricky thing that they're doing with the layout is that like the button alignment is a little bit confusing or misleading too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great point. The spacing here definitely kind of corresponds to those 3 categories of delivery, video, and music. I wonder if it, no, this is cancel my benefits for all of Prime, but it does look like I'm only canceling for video. And what happens if I keep my benefits for music? Is there a cancel button for music and delivery specifically? Very, very tricky. I will say the one part that they did to kind of that made it not the most infuriating experience is that there's a stepper at the top. So you kind of know where you are in the step. But why do we even need 3 steps to cancel your membership anyway? None of this information was relevant. They just tell me how to continue my benefits. If a user is kind of in this page, they've already made up their mind that they don't really want to stay. All right, so the last example for now that we want to talk about is this Lego website. And so this is another cookie example, but some kind of the fun thing they've done with this is, I'm going to zoom in again. Okay. So you have this pirate Lego, and then the copy is our cookies I'll be needing. And so kind of the fun thing that companies can really do is they can really show their branding through the way they deal with privacy. Companies shouldn't see it as kind of a hurdle they need to overcome. There are fun ways to help users be aware of data collection in a fun way while also showing your branding. And so this is a really great way that Lego is doing it. I am curious though, does approachability lower how tolerant we are with data collection? So I'll see this pirate and there's this fun copy and I think, oh, Lego did such a great thing. I'll go ahead and click the OK button. So that is something I'm kind of interested to see now that we're being more aware about data collection. And then with the screen on the right, this is also on the Lego website on a different page. They have a different pop-up. And you compared to the cookie example I showed earlier, you can see that here they do have a button that allows you to accept just the necessary cookies. And then above the copy, they'll explain what those are. But for those who don't want to read, it's very clear. You either accept all or you just accept what's necessary. And that's a really great way to give users control without kind of overloading them with too much information.
I have a question about this example.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it says ARG, I'll be needing those cookies. Do you think that's also because maybe there could be a demographic of a large percentage of children going onto this website? So they want kids to kind of see this as more playful too?
Yes, that's definitely a possibility. And I think you're right too. A lot of kids will probably be on this website and a lot of them won't know what cookies are. The first time I saw the word cookies, I thought there are things on the website we can eat. So, a fun way to introduce the kids to the concept of cookies. And they do kind of talk about, they don't explicitly talk about what cookies are, but they do kind of talk about how they're using it. And so this is a fun way to introduce kids to the concept of it without it being too much legal talk.
I don't know, but I think this is something that we could test as well. I think David mentioned earlier about being able to test copy with diverse groups of people. I'm not sure how often we test copy like this with different age groups, but it would be interesting to do that. I know when I first introduced my son, he's 11 now, but when I first introduced him to using the web and all that stuff, he would receive all of these like terms and conditions and policy, and especially when it's asking them for permission to even allow, say, use of the camera or something on a site. So when he sees these kind of copy, he freaks out because it's like, I don't know what's going on. What are they asking me for? So it is quite interesting to see how different age groups respond to these things. There was an interesting parody of this was it Mitchell's and the Machines on Netflix? It was a cartoon type of thing. And it was talking about the dad learning how to use YouTube for the first time. And I think there was like a terms and conditions prompt or something about updating or reading something. So it's interesting to see how that flies through.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say I'm kind of curious if they did A/B testing on the copy, but there is only one button, so the OK button. So I don't know how that would work. But speaking of A/B testing, I believe the California the Privacy Act under California actually is limiting A/B testing to some degree. I'm not clear on what degree it is, but it will be interesting to see for companies that do use A/B testing to validate which designs or copy are better among their users, to see the limitations of that in the next couple of years. All right, so what are some privacy dark patterns you have experienced or have seen kind of out there in the world?
I got one. All right, I'll admit it. So I was on Bumble for a time, and if you're on Bumble, you'll know how stupid their advertising techniques are. Like they keep pushing, oh, get a boost for like, and be at the top of the stack for like from 12 p.m. or something to 1 p.m. And it's like, at some point I was like, you know what? I've never actually tried like any premium services. I might as well try it with this one because that's the one I focused on. So I got the cheapest option available. But the thing is, when I tried to, because I knew they'd be doing some shady stuff. I mean, it's dating apps and tech. So I tried to delete it. But the thing is, if you go on the website, like there's no clear copy that tells you I want to cancel my plan. Instead, it tells you to pretty much like send in a support ticket and they'll get back to you. And it's like, okay. But then when I actually follow through with it, turns out they just took you to a website. And it's like, wait, okay, so I don't need to contact anyone. I can just delete. Okay. But the thing is, when I try to get rid of, when I try to delete my account or like the credit card information, it was this thing where like they showed you one screen of, yes, I want to delete it. But then on the next screen, there's no indication of whether or not you actually did. And it was the same thing for when you enter your credit card info too, because it's like, okay, I entered my info, but now I don't know what plan I got on. So at this point, it's like, wait, so how do I even know if they didn't sign me up for a different plan? And then that was a whole mess. And it took me complaining on literally being one of those dudes on Google review, being like, 1 star, what a terrible app, stop using dark patterns, for them to get back to me. So yeah, don't use Mumble.
I'm glad they got back to you.
Me too. I got that free boost and they refunded my $20. Wait, was it 20? I think so. Yeah, because that's right. Because I signed up for a cheaper plan, but then they signed me up for a more expensive one without me knowing.
Always great to have a charge on your credit card and you wonder, were you really the one that made that charge?
Did you find out when you looked at your credit card bill, or was it when you tried to cancel and then you realized that they were charging you all this stuff?
I think it was, oh no. So I actually tried to cancel it because I knew like the plan I wanted was like, all right, it'll be done after like a set amount of time. And then went back, I'm like, this isn't the plan at all.
Has anyone ever used PayPal to subscribe for anything and try to cancel the PayPal subscription?
Oh no, that sounds horrible.
It's very convoluted on top of their old UI and mixed with their new UI. It's a journey.
You can use, so like using PayPal as a payment method.
Yep, for subscribing to different services on a recurring basis. But the
Oh.
way PayPal was designed in the heyday, they made sure you kind of have to be, you have to look through all the settings before finding the subscription setting. But just stopping the setting doesn't actually stop the recurring billing. You actually have to cancel the whole access to the recurring billing for PayPal. And then generally they've been trying to hide that whole page in general.
Yeah, I think Instagram does something different where I tried to delete an old account, but then I kid you not, when you click the option inside, so they hide it inside your settings in your Instagram profile, right? But when you click it, you get taken to an external site. And I think it's literally the old original site they had back in 2010, 2009, because the aesthetics are completely different. It looks dated as hell. And then there's another journey you have to go inside that website just to find the proper delete account measure. And then it takes like, I think they said it takes like a week or something minimum to actually delete it properly. And they don't tell you what's going on in that week or why do you even need the week for.
I had the same experience because I was trying to delete an Instagram account and it's first trying to sign into it. So I remember not remembering my Instagram information. It wanted me to go to a desktop and then it said, if you want to delete this account, it's going to take like, you have to wait like 30 days. And I remember like I think a year later, I tried to check on to see if I actually deleted it or not. It was never deleted. So, and I think I just kind of gave up at that point. I was like, okay, well, someone Googles me or tries to search me on Instagram, they're gonna probably get ghosted or get some activity.
Oh yeah, if you have never Googled yourself, that is definitely something interesting to do. You know, and I have such a common last name too for an Asian person, I was actually surprised at how much information I could find on myself just from Googling.
Yeah, and I think there's two ways to Google yourself, because I used to Google myself while still logging into my Gmail. So I'll pull up the data that it already has when logged in. But then if I'm not signed into my account, because you're usually always signed into a Google account, and you try to Google yourself through like a private, it's also a different web search result. Mhm.
This talk about like trying to delete accounts and stuff reminded me of like if you get those like credit card offers or whatever in the mail, they have a phone number at the bottom that you need to call to stop receiving like all these like free credit card offers and whatever. There's a phone number that you have to call, but when you call that number, you have to give your social security number to unsubscribe from that mail. So I'm trying to get rid of this mail, so I'm not, because I want to be eco-friendly and like not get mail that I'm not going to use. But I'm not going to give my social security number to some random phone number from an envelope. So I keep getting those envelopes. Like there's not really a clear way to feel safe about unsubscribing from that. So that was just something I thought of right now. And then I've been doing a little bit of research on like subscription for email preferences and like what those preference centers look like. And I've seen some bad examples that people have posted of like when you try to unsubscribe, it asks you for additional information before you can unsubscribe, not just like why you're unsubscribing, but like you have to fill in like what country you're in, or like you have to finish filling in your profile before you can unsubscribe. Like weird things like where they're probably using like some sort of third-party site to manage their email subscriptions, but they probably didn't set it up correctly. So you have to jump through those hoops before you can hit the unsubscribe button. So that was something interesting that I noticed recently.
Oh gosh, providing more information so you can stop receiving some information.
Yeah, I remember hearing a story where someone tried to cancel, like I think one of their parents passed away and their like Spectrum account was under the parent's name, the dead one. So they contacted them on behalf of that deceased parent to cancel it, and they're like, "Yeah, of course. Do you mind sending us their death certificate?" And it's like, what the fuck do you need a death certificate for? Just cancel the damn account.
You know, and that actually points out a really great thing. What happens to data for people who are no longer here? At my last company, actually one of our execs passed away, sadly, and we just kept getting telemarketing phone calls asking for him. And you know, at first we started telling them, oh, he actually is no, you know, he passed away, and then they'll feel really bad. And then but we got so many of them, by so many I mean we got up to like 10 a day, which is a lot. You know, we kind of started saying, oh, he's not here right now, how did you reach him? And then they'll say the most ridiculous things. They're like, oh, I just talked to him at a conference last week. How did you talk to someone who's no, you know? And again, that goes back to, how are they getting this information? They must have gotten this phone number or this email, some of our data from somewhere else, another company who sold this data or leaked it out too. So even just, you know, considering people who aren't here, how are we managing their data and who's getting that data is a really big concern. I do have one last question before the end of this talk, which is for those of you who have worked in kind of in this space, how have you balanced designing solutions for privacy when there are also business needs? Actually, I think this kind of repeats with an earlier question about how you guys have dealt with privacy in your work.
I think that for us, or for me, we really have to ask the question, by taking in this data, is the outcome or the solution, or kind of what we give in return, outweighs the benefit of taking that data. Because sometimes like it may not be end users like us as customers that you can deal with, but maybe people that are in high security companies. or in services. And you have to, and then there's also different types of roles that you have to consider. So that is something that we'll talk about, where let's say we want to make sure that, oh, if someone has an administrative role, then they'll see more data. But if someone has maybe a non-administrative role, then we don't have to give them that much data, or we don't have to ask for that much data. So there's things that we'll consider and see how much does it outweigh, or can we give somewhat of a better, can we still give a good service even if we don't have that data in hand? Because I think there's always that question where the more data you get, the better experience you give. But sometimes that's not really true. Maybe the more data you get, the more business, or the more business that you're giving back. And then also, it's also the higher risk of security leakage, like outbreak or any leakage. And that can be even a bigger problem. So.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if I'm using this particular app, why would they need the specific data? Am I really getting a better service out of it? Why does TikTok need every single piece of data in my phone, every single data from all my connected apps, even though it's a social media video app?
Yeah, I think at that point, I'm like, is it really benefiting me, or is it benefiting people that can be selling on this app and generating advertisements? And then just leads me to just casually start buying more and more things if I'm on this app.
Mm-hmm. All right, I know we are actually running on the hour, so that is, and feel free to let us know if you have any other questions even after the chat. But for now, that is the end of our talk today. So thank you for participating and for joining. Really great to hear everyone's examples. And if anyone's interested in some of the resources we looked at, or more information about dark patterns and privacy, I think we are sending the slides out, Grace, are we? And if we're not, darkpatterns.org is a really great place to learn about dark patterns in general. GDPR is the European regulation that a lot of companies have to follow now, so that's a really great place to start as well. And then that design by privacy framework, which actually is part of GDPR now as well, is a really great way for designers and researchers to make sure that they're considering privacy when they're in their work. All right, so that is the end of our talk today. If anyone is staying after, I can show some of those ridiculous examples that I found when I was looking for newsletter signups. And other than that, thank you for joining and have a great rest of your day.
Okay, Catherine. Yeah, the link for the slides will be added in the feedback form from when you sign up from Luma. So we'll be including that, and then I guess it would be fun to share, like, how much data have you shared with SGVUX and how much data are we tracking you? So I think that would be a fun, if not scary, thing to look at.
I love some of these examples because a lot of them are just blatantly rude, like this ad blocker one. Turn off your ad blocker or you're a bad person. Sign up for our recipe cookbook or you don't eat. Ever thought why your dog does this? Understand your dog with our free newsletter. No thanks, I don't want to understand my dog. This is just, there's so much guilt in this copyright, in these copywriting. Oh, and then I actually did see this one because I do some like plant and gardening stuff, and either you sign up for this guide or you already know everything about gardening. I wonder if companies think they're being funny by using copywriting like this.
Didn't get the legal approval. Wait, which one? Referring to?
Oh, I just meant in general, like your copy, like how involved is the legal approval process?